Hello and welcome to the Affordable and Special Needs Housing Program Guidelines Overview with a rental focus. My name is Carly Lackman and I am the Program Manager for the rental team. Today we are going to overview the guidelines, kind of just moving through all of the pieces that are included in the ASNH guidelines and talking a little bit more about where they came from and what things you should know around program requirements and regulations. So first, I want to highlight the difference between the rental manual and the program guidelines. So new this year, FY25, we split the previous guidelines into the ASNH program guidelines and the rental and homeownership manuals. The guidelines are standard for the homeowner and rental programs and just include those general programmatic requirements. And the manual is more specific to that application round, so it will include source amounts and dates. It includes the narrative questions and attachments, and we cover that in the how to apply. So first, what is ASNH? We are the Affordable and Special Needs Housing Program, which is a consolidated competitive application used by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, to award National Housing Trust Fund, Home Investment Partnerships, Virginia Housing Trust Fund, and High E funds to multifamily rental developments and single-family home ownership developments across the Commonwealth. Previously, we had the quarterly home funding program and the Virginia Housing Trust Fund program separate. And in 2016, when the National Housing Trust Fund was introduced, we created the single competitive application form. We award those 4 cycles of funding as available, federal and state funds, and we have 2 application cycles annually, usually in the fall and the spring. So like I said, our sources of funding, our competitive sources are Home Investment Partnerships, or HOME, National Housing Trust Fund, or NHTF, and Virginia Housing Trust Fund, or VHTF. And based on project eligibility and funding availability, we have the Housing Innovations and Energy Efficiency Program, or High E. So HOME was created through the National Affordable Housing Act of 1990, and these funds are made available annually through formula allocations to states and local governments, or PJs. And DHCD is a PJ which is responsible for conducting needs assessments and establishing priorities and goals and developing and managing the programs that will help meet these goals. ASNH is a subset of the HOME funding and uses HOME to support the development of rental units for individuals and families with incomes at or below 50 or 60% of the area median income. Please note that home ownership projects have different AMI limits, and you should refer to the homeowner manual. National Housing Trust Fund issued its first allocation in 2016, and it was created as a federal block grant to states. It's the largest federal program designed specifically to support the production and preservation of affordable housing for extremely low income individuals. At DHCD, we use these funds only for rental units, and they are made available for individuals with incomes at or below 30% of the area median income. Virginia Housing Trust Fund is a special allocation of state funds intended to help address the Commonwealth's housing needs and reduce homelessness. No less than 80% of the Virginia Housing Trust Fund must be allocated to a competitive loan pool, which is ASNH. So 80% of what goes into that housing trust fund comes to the ASNH program for our competitive application. They can be awarded to projects developing rental or for sale homes, which are made available to individuals or families with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. So first, who can apply for our program? Nonprofits, for-profits, public housing authorities, and DHCD certified CHODOs, or community development housing organizations, who are the primary partner in the project, are the entity responsible for long-term operations and compliance, and they must be free of outstanding audit and compliance issues. Eligible applicant roles. You could be the site owner. This is frequently the housing authority's role in applications. They will have a ground lease to redevelop public housing. So they hold the valid title to or long-term leasehold interest in the site. The developer has a contractual obligation to develop the site, and the sponsor is an owner or partial owner that agrees to convey ownership to a second nonprofit at a predetermined time or at completion. This requires a DHCD consult before you apply. And please note that the applicant cannot be the project LLC or legal entity set up for the development of the site. If you have any questions, like I said, please reach out to DHCD, ASNH staff, and attend a pre-application call for when you apply. So as I mentioned, CHODOs are able to apply for as an applicant. This is a special status that we provide to a private, nonprofit, community-based organization whose primary purpose is to provide and develop affordable housing for the community it serves. So to be classified as a CHODO, you must apply through CAMS to DHCD's application, and you must meet organizational, mission, financial management, and capacity requirements, which include are not limited to certified nonprofit status, being a community-based organization, low income representation and board composition. Your primary mission should be the provision of affordable housing. You should have a demonstrated capacity to develop affordable housing, and you need to conform to accounting standards and financial soundness. DHCD sets aside 15% of home funds for CHODO-related activities. Certification as a CHODO provides scoring preference on home funding source applications. So again, it is the consolidated competitive application, but if you apply for home funds, you can receive an additional 5 points if you are DHCD certified at time of application. These requirements must continually be met throughout involvement with the home program, and their application as well as the annual recertification are in CAMS. All projects must meet these program requirements. So for rental, you must be new construction, substantial renovation, or adaptive reuse. And if you are rehab, it requires a minimum investment of $15,000 a unit with 3 or more major systems updated. There needs to be common ownership, management, and financing. We allow scattered site applications, but we recommend a consultation ahead of time, pre-application call. And for single room occupancies, these are also allowable in some instances, but a consultation is required before you apply. Again, the program for the homeownership program has different requirements, so please refer to that manual. All projects that apply must have a minimum of 5 units targeted to low-income households and a minimum of 5 per source as applied. So if you apply for 3 different sources, you must have a minimum of 15 units. We do allow market rate units be in the project, but again, a minimum of 5 must be at 80% or below area median income. There's a minimum affordability of at least 30 years. You have to meet Section 504 requirements, so a minimum of 5% of the dwelling units, but not less than 1, must be accessible to individuals with mobility impairments, and a minimum of 2, but not less than 1, 2%, but not less than 1 must be accessible to individuals with sensory impairments. Additionally, a phase 1 environmental review is required at time of application. There are also additional regulations that you will need to follow to apply to our program. So the Fair Housing Act, Lead Safe Housing, Uniform Relocation Act, Labor Standards, Violence Against Women Act. These and additional information on eligible costs, rent limits and increases, leasing requirements are all in the program guidelines, and I highly recommend familiarizing yourself with these regulations. There are also some federal regulations that I wanted to make you aware of when you apply for Home and National Housing Trust Fund. For home, we require a Part 58 environmental review. This is a federal regulation that no development activity, including the acquisition of the property, can occur prior to the completion of this review, which includes the publication of a notice of findings and request for release of funds from HUD. So if you are applying for home funds, you cannot have any choice limiting activities occur until you have received the authority to use grant funds from HUD. This may have occurred at the local level, and that is a different instance. You are able to move forward with starting the project and doing those choice limiting activities. However, please note that DHCD cannot sign any contracts until we have done our own Part 58 review, which does include the public notice period. Additionally, projects in an entitlement or consortium are required to have a 25% local match at time of application. And for National Housing Trust Fund, there are additional environmental review provisions that we will require you provide to us so that we can review before we can sign a contract. There's also subsidy limits that are predetermined by HUD, which determines the maximum investment of home or National Housing Trust Fund dollars based on the number of assisted or quote floating units. So if you come in with 10 units in your project, DHCD might request that 5 of them be floating DHCD home units, for example. And we want to make sure that based on the size and type of those units, that the amount that we are giving you does not exceed the subsidy limit from HUD. So like I said, we will determine the number of required assisted units based on the amount that you have applied for compared to your total development costs. So we will request no less than 5 floating units, and it could be up to 11 floating units based on the size of the project and the total development cost. Please also note that all federal projects, federally funded projects, must comply with Section 3. The developer must use hiring, contracting, and subcontracting to maximize the benefit of Section 3 and developing opportunities for low income and very low income persons in the service area to be employed by the project as possible. So please note that the project owner and developer are required to adopt specific goals set by HUD, develop a Section 3 plan that complies with HUD, and comply with required notifications, documentation, and reporting requirements that we may have through CAMS. The required income targeting, as I've mentioned before, for each source, Virginia Housing Trust Fund, 80% or below, as well as high E. Home investment partnerships, 60% or below, of which 20% of those floating units have to be at 50% or below. And the National Housing Trust Fund is 30% or below. Minimum of 5 units may be up to 11 requested by DHCD. All of our projects that are funded must be affordable for at least 30 years. We have a split federal and state affordability period for home to match that 30 years total so that we have consistency across the program. We may approve that our loans are longer, the terms are longer than 30 years to be coterminous with first mortgage, and we can discuss that during a pre-application or post-application call. Our funding caps are as follows. You can request up to $1 million of a federal source. So home and or National Housing Trust Fund can be requested up to $1 million depending on eligibility. $2 million is the maximum Virginia Housing Trust Fund request, and $2 million maximum high E request. Again, please note the high E request must be 10% of total improvement costs or $2 million, whichever is less. There is a calculator in our underwriting workbook that we provide during the application. So that makes the award caps without high E a maximum of $3 million if you're eligible for all sources as applied, and with high E, $5 million. DHCD also utilizes discretion to make projects whole, and we encourage projects to come in, applicants to come in requesting the full amount of what they need, and we can move funds around as we have available to fully fund a project and not delay and create any gaps. Our loans are low interest deferred principal permanent loans. So we have a default interest rate of 3% for competitive sources and 0% for high E. Low interest rate. You may request as low as 0.5% or for federal sources and 0% for Virginia Housing Trust Fund. Again, interest payments are required over the full affordability period. There are no cash flow loans, no construction disbursements, and they are available at permanent conversion only, secured by second position lien and deed of trust. I want to talk a little bit about application submission. Again, the how to apply presentation attendance is highly recommended as things may adjust each round, and those adjustments will be included in the manual as well as the how to apply. We use CAMS to apply for our program, and when you apply, it must be complete and include all required attachments. We then have a panel review for eligibility and completeness score and rank the projects at a minimum of 60 to be eligible for funding. Need is part of our scoring criteria. That's up to 40 points. We also look at feasibility, 30 points, and capacity for 30 points. We talk more about what this means and what you need to include in your application and how to apply. ASNH does prioritize permanent supportive housing. There is a 5-point scoring preference in the needs section with qualified permanent supportive housing, which means that you must have the minimum number or percentage of units as in the guidelines. So 32 units or greater, or 8% of total units. 11 to 31 units, you have to have a minimum of 2, and 10 units or less, a minimum of 1 unit to be considered permanent supportive housing. It is not identical to what Virginia Housing's LIHTC program looks for PSH, and we do require an MOU with the referring agency. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to staff or refer to the program guidelines. When we score, we have some funding priorities that we look specifically at and extra points that are eligible for meeting those funding priorities. So we look at PSH or vouchers, and if they're committed and documented, we encourage broadband to be provided for residents. So if we see free broadband in unit, there's a potential for additional points. We also look to see if you have a green build certification, if you have contracted on-site services. We look at if you increase your amount of 504 units, or if you use universal design concepts. We will also be looking at your phase 1 to see if there are any findings to kind of gauge the site suitability. We're looking for a construction timeline scheduled to start within 6 months of funding, and that all previously funded projects are on schedule. For home, we give additional points for CHODOs, also if you are in a non-entitlement or non-consortium, and if you have that Part 58 uploaded to your application. Once we've made our determinations, we send it over to the Office of the Governor, who makes the program funding award announcements public. And this is through either usually a publication of a press release. And once this cycle has closed, so once the application is closed, we are unable to answer inquiries about the timing or contents of the announcement, and we will not answer such inquiries. After the Governor announces the funds, we send an email to the project primary contact as listed for that project in CAMS, containing either a notification of awarded funds or a denial of funding. I wanted to give just a general overview of what happens once a project is awarded. We send out deputy letters and terms letters. We require that the developer attends an onboarding call with our staff. The developer will then return the executed terms letters. Federal projects will have to submit that environmental review that is required for the source that was awarded, and our staff will need time to review and process that environmental review. We then confirm the information that will be needed for the program agreement with the developer. It usually requires additional conversation. After that, we send loan information over to Virginia Housing, where they draft the commitments and loan documents for signature. Please note that with the increase in number of awards due to the increase of funds, that we definitely need time both on our program agreements and for Virginia Housing to draft commitments. We'll need time to turn those around. So if you have something that is time sensitive, we recommend talking with your program administrator as soon as possible. But Virginia Housing drafts those commitments and loan documents for signature. Then we are in kind of the waiting period, and what we will need is for the developer to provide status updates during construction and let us know when you're slated to complete the project and when it is completed, so that we can coordinate with the developer and Virginia Housing legal staff to coordinate that close on the permanent financing. Once we've closed on the loan and you get your money, the project moves to ASNH long-term rental compliance. And I just wanted to touch very briefly on long-term compliance. So during that affordability period, each project is required to submit annual rent and occupancy reports and project financials. We will verify these reports through on-site monitoring. We will look at your compliance with the rent limits, the occupancy, your property standards, and other programmatic requirements. And non-compliance may suspend eligibility for current and future contracts and may result in the repayment of all funds to DHCD. So please make sure that your project primary contact is correct in CAMS for all projects, new or old, because that is who we reach out to start that long-term compliance. Thank you so much for attending today's overview of the guidelines. Again, my name is Carly Lackman and I'm the program manager. You can see my email here on the screen, carly.lackman@dhcd.virginia.gov. And this presentation, as well as the guidelines, any future program manuals and how to apply will all be shared on the DHCD website, dhcd.virginia.gov/ASNH. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.